Hello and welcome to pmclounge.com. This is Lounge Fever, a series of videos where we try to answer your questions. And today we are discussing the difference between a requirement and a user story. We all know in the traditional waterfall model, what we deal with are requirements, requirement documents, right? And then in the agile way of working, when you're talking about Scrum, you're dealing with user stories, not requirements. So what exactly is the difference between a requirement and a user story? We recently did a video on user story. That will be the second link in the description because the first one is going to be a playlist of all the Lounge Fever videos we have done so far on agile topics. So do check them out. Let's get started. Quick reminder, please hit the like button and let the YouTube algorithm know that these videos are helpful. So we all know that user stories are written on index cards, and this is something that we discussed in the video that's in the second link in the description below, right? So when you write requirement on an index card, does it turn into a user story? That is not the case, right? That's not how it works. Actually, what happens is most of the real world Scrum teams, they don't even use index cards to write their requirements or user stories. A software like Jira or Excel that can be used, but index cards are rarely used. Next is the biggest difference here between a requirement and a user story is the fact that the aim of requirements, the requirements document and jotting down the requirements is to get into all the details about a feature, which is of course a requirement, and you describe it in as much detail as possible. But when we talk about user stories don't attempt to nail down the specific details about the feature, right? Nail down every single thing about the feature. That's not how user stories work. So that's the biggest difference between a requirement and an index card. Now you might wonder if not all specific details are being documented when we talk about user stories. Where are these details stored, right? We'll talk about it in the next slide. So let's go there. So let's talk about the goals of a user story, and that's how we'll be able to understand how user stories work, right? So we capture just enough information, unlike requirements. Requirements capture every single thing about a feature, right? Which is the requirements, right? So the required feature, every single information, every single detail about it is captured. That's how requirements document work. But user stories goal is to capture just enough information so that everybody can remember who's going to use the feature, what is the feature about, and why users want that feature. So these are the important points that are documented about every single user story. And we are not documenting lines and lines and paragraphs of every specific detail about the requested feature, right? So that is one of the goals of user story, to have just enough information. Now the fact that user story, when you're documenting just enough information, it also leads to stakeholders and team members, the Scrum team members and stakeholders, they talk about the feature, they talk about the requirement, and when they discuss the requirement, that's how a proper understanding of the requirement is developed. And that's the whole idea, right? Instead of jotting it down in a 200 page long requirement specification document that nobody is going to read, right? We What we basically do is document just enough information and get the Scrum team members and stakeholders talk about specific features, specific requirements, specific user story, and that's how a proper understanding is developed. Note that, like I said in the previous slide, it is important to have further documentation as well, and sometimes further documentation is required. So whenever it is required, there will be further documentation of a user story, and it is not something which is, 2 3 lines written on an index card. But if the Scrum team feels like this user story requires more documentation, more details, then that's how the team is going to come up with more documentation and more details about that user story. They are not going to write specific details of every single requirement. So the basic idea behind a user story is to basically jot down just enough information, get your stakeholders and Scrum team members talk about the user story, and then, if required, have supplementary documentation too. Quick reminder, you can grab our free study plan and clear your PMP in 50 days. Head over to pmclounge.com/PMP study plan. Thousands of aspirants have made use of this. So question for this video before I let you go, does your team use index cards to write user stories? I'm curious to know because on real life projects, I've never really seen a Scrum team use index cards to write user stories. So have your team used index cards in the past? Do they use index cards today? Or have you seen a team? Do you know a team that does so? Let me know in the comments how easy or how difficult is it to do so. Let me know in the comments. Definitely looking forward to your answers. So that's all that we had in this video. I hope you got value out of it and were able to understand the difference between a requirement and a user story. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Smash that like button. It helps us stay motivated and create more free content for you. Consider contributing to us over at pmclounge.com/contribute. Thank you and have a nice day.